You ever heard of a place where the cold isn't just the air, it's the memory, the silence, the way the walls seem to hold their breath? This is the Hotel de Glace, a place where ice and history have made a perfect, chilling bed. Built in the early 1900s, it was meant to be a marvel of engineering, a place where the wealthy could come to escape the summer heat. But the cold never left, not in the air, not in the hearts of those who stayed too long. You might think, well, that's just old architecture, but there's something about this place that feels wrong. Like the cold is waiting for you to step inside and never leave. And if you think you're safe, just remember, some places don't just remember, they remember you. You know, the Hotel de Glace didn't start as a hotel at all. It was a grand summer resort in the 1800s, built by a wealthy industrialist named Henry Morel, who had a real obsession with ice. He believed the cold could purify the soul, and he built this place with the most intricate ice sculptures you could imagine. The place was a hit for the elite, who would come to sip champagne and dance in the ballroom made entirely of ice. But behind the glamour, there was a darker side, a secret room where Henry kept his wife, who had been locked away for heresy. She was accused of witchcraft, and he claimed she cursed the hotel. When Henry died in 1893, the hotel was left to his son, who tried to keep the legacy alive. But the curse, if there was one, was real. The ice started to crack, and the hotel became a place of whispers and disappearances. Some say the ghost of Henry's wife still walks the halls, her voice echoing through the icy corridors. The hotel was abandoned in the 1950s, but locals say the ice never fully melted. Some say you can still hear her, the wife, crying out for help in the dead of night. Others say the ice is just a metaphor for the pain that never leaves. And that's how the Hotel de Glace became a place of both beauty and terror, a frozen monument to love, obsession, and the price of keeping secrets too long. You remember the first time you noticed the lights flickered just a little too often, like a nervous heartbeat. It was subtle, but your instincts said, not normal. Then came the whispers, just above a whisper, as if the walls themselves were trying to tell you something. You thought it was the wind, but you were wrong. The staff began to leave in the middle of the night, disappearing without a trace. You tried to convince yourself it was just a bad rumor, but your gut said otherwise. And then there were the cold spots, places where the temperature dropped so suddenly, you had to double-check if the thermostat was broken or if something else was going on. You ever notice how some places seem to hold their secrets tighter than others? The Hotel de Glace, for instance, has a history that's more than just a chill. One winter, a young guest vanished without a trace. The staff said she'd gone to check her room, but no one saw her leave. The door was locked from the inside, and the ice was still melting in her wake. The police called it a case of mistaken identity, but the staff knew better. They'd seen her walk through the halls laughing just the day before, and now she was gone, like the cold had taken her. To this day, the Hotel de Glace still gets a few calls from guests who swear they saw her, just a glimpse, a whisper, a chill. And the ice? It's still melting, just like she was. So, what do you think? Was she lost in the cold, or was she never really there at all? The Hotel de Glace doesn't give up its secrets easily, but sometimes it whispers them in the dark. I remember the first time I heard the bellboy's voice. It was late, and the hotel was silent, but his words echoed through the halls like a ghost with a grudge. He said, "No one leaves the Hotel de Glace alive." One guest swore she saw a figure in a tuxedo standing by the front desk, motionless, watching her. She said it looked like a man who'd been there for decades, waiting for someone who never came. Another told me about the cold spots, not the usual kind, but a sudden drop in temperature that would make your breath freeze in your lungs. It happened in the middle of the night, just as the elevator stopped working. There's a story about a man who stayed for 3 nights and never left. He said he was there to write a novel, but when he checked out, the pages were filled with names of people who'd never been there. And then there's the sound, a low, mournful hum, like a broken violin, that comes from the walls. Some say it's the hotel itself, remembering the lives it once held. We started with the old blueprints, you know, the ones tucked inside a leather-bound volume in the hotel's archive. They showed a maze of corridors, staircases that led nowhere, and a room labeled the Frost Room. No one could ever find it. The first investigator, a retired police captain, insisted on visiting the Frost Room. He said he felt a cold breath on his neck when he opened the door, like someone had just exhaled from across the room. The hotel's caretaker, a quiet old man named Henry, claimed the footprints appeared every year on the same date, December 24. He said they were a sign, like a ghost trying to send a message. We even found a letter, written in the 1920s, sealed in an envelope with wax. It spoke of a missing woman who had once worked at the hotel, and the final line was cut off, as if she had never finished her story. And the final clue? A mirror in the hotel's lobby. cracked just enough to show a reflection that moved when no one was looking, like someone was watching from behind the glass. You've heard the stories about the Hotel de Glace, but there's one thing they never explain: why the ice never melts, not even in July. It's not just the cold, it's the way the ice feels, like it's breathing, like it's waiting for something or someone to return. Some say it's the ghosts of the hotel's last guests, trapped in the ice like statues. Others say it's the hotel itself, alive and still waiting. No one knows what happened in the final days of the Hotel de Glace, but the ice remembers, and it won't let go. Some say the hotel was built on the bones of a forgotten love, a tragedy so deep it seeped into the ice itself. Others whisper that the ice is alive and it remembers. A local fisherman once claimed he saw a woman's reflection in the ice, but when he looked away, there was no one there. He said she was wearing a gown from the 1800s, and her eyes followed him all the way home. Some believe the hotel was never meant to be built at all, that the ice was cursed, and the builders paid with their lives, their souls trapped in the walls, waiting for the right moment to break free. And then there are the children, those who grew up near the hotel, who still tell stories of hearing laughter in the halls, of seeing a flicker of movement in the empty rooms, of feeling eyes on them when they were alone. Some say the hotel isn't haunted by ghosts, it's haunted by the past. And the past, dear friends, is never so far away as it seems. You ever wonder what happens to a place when the stories stop? The Hotel de Glace isn't just a building, it's a memory, a whisper, a question that refuses to fade. The last guest left in 1998, and since then, no one has returned. No one dares. The hotel's silence is louder than its echoes. What's left to explain? The police say it's a ghost story. The locals say it's a warning. And the hotel? It just sits there, frozen in time, holding its breath, waiting for someone to listen. So, dear listener, what do you think? Is the Hotel de Glace a place of truth or a place of fear? Or is it simply a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved? You know, sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that whisper the loudest in the silence between the stories. And sometimes the truest ghosts aren't the ones you see, but the ones you feel in your bones, long after the tale is done. So, as we wrap up this tale, I'll leave you with a question: what do you think lingers in the Hotel de Glace, beyond the ice and the cold? Stay warm, stay curious, and remember, some stories are best told by the firelight. You've heard of the old stone walls, the hidden chambers, and the whispers in the wind. But have you ever wondered what happens when a place is so old it remembers the people who lived there? This is the Priory of Saint Foy, once a place of prayer, now a place of silence. But silence, my dear, can be the most unsettling sound of all. The priory was built in the 12th century, a sanctuary for the devout, but rumors say it was also a place of secrets where the line between the sacred and the sin was blurred. Now, centuries later, the stones still hum with the weight of its past. Some say they can hear the echoes of prayers, others the cries of the damned. But what truly haunts this place is not the ghosts, but the stories of love, betrayal, and the price of living too close to the divine. You ever wonder how a place like this, so quiet now, could have once been so alive? The Priory of Saint Foy started in the 12th century, when a young monk named Brother Simon arrived with a vision, not of power, but of purpose. He came from a humble village, but his dreams were grand. He saw the priory as a sanctuary for the poor, a place where faith and healing could flourish, not just for the body, but for the soul. But the priory wasn't just for the sick or the weary. It was also a place of learning, where monks copied manuscripts by candlelight, their hands stained with ink and their hearts full of devotion. And yet, for all its piety and purpose, the priory was not without its secrets. Some say Brother Simon's vision was too much for the people of the village, who began to whisper of his dark ambitions. So you see, the priory was more than just a place of worship. It was a place of dreams, of hope, and of quiet fears, all of which would one day echo through its halls in ways no one could have imagined. You remember the first time you heard the bell, don't you? That hollow, echoing sound, like it was coming from the bones of the earth itself. It wasn't the bell at all, just the wind, but it felt like a warning. Then came the whispers. Not loud, not even clear, but just enough to make your skin prickle. You thought you were imagining it, but the other guests had heard it too. It was always the same words, like a lullaby from another time. One night, the door to the chapel slammed shut by itself. No one touched it, yet the sound of the door echoed through the stone walls, and the air grew colder. You could see your breath in the dim light, like it was a ghost trying to speak. And then, the scent. A faint, sweet fragrance, like old roses or something more ancient. It wasn't in the air, it was in the walls, in the dust, in the silence. It was a memory you couldn't place, but you knew it belonged to something that had never left. You tried to convince yourself it was just old buildings, just the weight of history pressing in. But you knew, deep down, that something had changed. The air had grown heavier, the silence louder, and the walls were no longer just stone. You know, sometimes the most terrifying things don't make a sound at all. It's the silence that lingers after the storm, the kind that makes you wonder if you're truly alone. In 1927, a young woman named Elise Dufresne vanished without a trace. She was last seen walking the cloistered gardens, her footsteps the last to echo through the stone walls. Her room was found untouched, her belongings still in place, as if she had simply stepped out and never returned. No signs of struggle, no traces of her presence. The locals say she was cursed, that she had fallen in love with a man who was not meant to be. But I wonder, was she a victim of love, or of something far older, buried in these stones? To this day, the wind still carries her name through the corridors, a whisper that lingers like the scent of rosemary in the air, sweet, but never quite gone. I've spoken with a few locals who swear they've seen the ghost of a nun walking the cloisters at dusk. She's always in white, with a veil, and she never speaks, just watches. One man claims he heard a child's voice calling from the crypt, "Help me," and when he ran to investigate, there was no one there, only a faint smell of lavender. Some say the priory is haunted by the voices of the poor, those who were buried in secret and never given a proper funeral. They whisper in the wind, pleading for release. And then there are the stories of the ghostly monks, their robes trailing behind them as they pace the halls, always heading toward the same stone door that no one can open. One old caretaker told me he used to hear the sound of a bell ringing in the night, even though no bell was ever installed. He said it was the sound of a child's laughter, too. We started with the archives, sifting through brittle pages and faded ink. The first clue was a name, Madame Veronique, a midwife accused of witchcraft in 1642. Her trial was brief, but the records were thick with whispers. She was said to have called the dead from the grave, and that her final words were a curse on the priory. Then we found the diary hidden in a hollowed-out bookshelf, its pages filled with desperate confessions and a final entry: "The walls are listening, and they remember." The deeper we dug, the more the priory seemed to shift around us, old stone doors opening on their own, voices in the wind that didn't belong to anyone. And one night, in the silence between the clock's ticks, I heard a voice, not a whisper, but a soft, clear murmur, saying my name. You know, the one thing that's always bugged me about the priory is the missing piece, the detail no one seems to want to talk about. It's like the story stops just before it gets good. They say the last monk who lived there vanished without a trace. No body, no diary, no clues, just silence. And yet, every time someone tries to dig deeper, they're met with a wall of silence. You ever wonder what the monks knew that the world was never meant to know? That the priory wasn't just a place of worship, but a vault of secrets, some of them still whispering through the stones. And here's the kicker. No one's ever found the place where the last monk disappeared. Not the monks, not the historians, not even the ghosts. Just a hush, and a door that never opens. So, if you're ever in the area, and you hear a bell ringing in the distance but it's not the one in the tower, maybe you should take a closer look. Just don't look too closely at the spot where the bell should be. Some say the priory's secrets were buried with the monks, but others insist the stones still hum with their last prayers. You've heard the whispers. What do you think the walls remember? Local elders tell of a hidden chamber beneath the cloister, where a medieval inquisitor once sealed away a dangerous truth. They say it's not the ghosts that haunt the priory, it's the past that won't stay buried. Theories range from ancient curses to wartime secrets. One local believes the priory was built on a pagan site, and the spirits are just the old gods trying to remember their names. And then there are the children, those who claim to see a little girl in a red dress, playing in the courtyard. They say she's not a ghost, but a lost soul, waiting for someone to find her. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't what you see, but what you feel, like a cold breath on your neck, or the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes watching you from the dark. The records are silent on the last days of the abbess, but the whispers say she vanished in the night, her final prayer still echoing through the hollows of the old stone. And now, decades later, the stones still remember. Some say the wind carries her voice in the autumn, or that the silence is louder than the noise. The truth remains a mystery, but the air here still feels thick with something older than time, a presence that refuses to be forgotten. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones that don't end. Like the priory's whispers, they just linger. Did you ever wonder if some places remember more than we do? We often think of ghosts as echoes of the past, but what if they're trying to tell us something about the present? Or maybe they're just waiting for someone to listen. I wonder, if you stood here at night, would you hear it too? That faint, almost musical sound, like a bell, but not quite. Or maybe it's the wind, trying to speak. And if you do hear it, don't be surprised if it leads you somewhere you never expected. Because sometimes, the past has a way of finding you. You've heard of the Baskersville legend, but let me take you to the real place where it all began. This is the moor, where the wind howls like a wounded beast and the trees whisper secrets only the brave or the foolish dare to listen. It's not just the wind that gives this place its eerie reputation, it's the stories. People say the moor is alive, that it watches you, that it knows when you're alone. And it's not just the stories, it's the silence. The kind that feels like it's holding its breath. There's something about the moor that feels like it's waiting for something or someone. It's not just the stories that make it scary, it's the way the wind carries them, and how the silence feels like it's listening back. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself wandering this place, remember that the moor doesn't just haunt the Baskervilles, it haunts anyone who dares to walk its path. And sometimes, it's not the hound that's the danger, it's the moor itself. You know, the Baskerville legend didn't start with a hound, it started with a man named Henry, a doctor with a dark secret and a family curse that made his name synonymous with fear. In 1880, Henry Baskerville, a respected physician, found himself in a web of guilt after an unspeakable act left his brother dead and his family's name ruined. The hound was just the beginning, but the truth, it's far more human. Henry's brother had been a victim of a tragic accident, not a supernatural curse. The hound was never real, just a symbol of the guilt that haunted Henry to his death. And so, the legend grew, not from a beast, but from the weight of a man's conscience. The Baskerville hound became a cautionary tale, a ghost that never left the family's fate. It's not just a story, it's a mirror, reflecting the fear we all carry. And sometimes, the scariest things aren't monsters at all, but the ghosts of our own choices. You remember the way the fog clung to the moors like a living thing, how it wrapped around the hedges and swallowed the light. It was the kind of fog that made you feel watched, not by the wind, but by something older, something that had been waiting. One evening, the footprints appeared barely visible, but there. Not from any human, not from any animal, just deep, deliberate prints, leading away from the old Baskerville estate as though someone had been running or fleeing. The police dismissed it as a prank, but the prints kept coming. Some were fresh, others were weak-souled. It was as if the moors themselves were trying to tell a story, one that had been buried for generations. And then, the first disappearance. A young man, no more than 20, vanished without a trace. The last anyone saw of him was running through the moors, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. And that was the moment the world remembered the hound. You know, some people say that the true horror of the Baskervilles isn't the hound itself, but the silence that follows. A silence so thick, it seems to swallow the very air. That's when the real fear begins. The last time anyone saw Sir Charles Baskerville alive, he was standing at the edge of that same moor, staring at the dark hills. His eyes were wide, his breath shallow, and his hand trembled as if he were holding something invisible. He didn't return from that walk. No one ever found his body. Just a torn coat, a broken stick, and the faintest trace of a growl echoing from the hills like the hound was still there, waiting. And then, the Baskervilles' curse began. No one dared go near the moor after that. Not even the servants. They said the hound didn't just haunt the land, it haunted the minds of those who had seen it. The fear was so deep, so absolute, that even the family's own Dr. Mortimer, refused to walk the moor. He said the hound didn't just run on four legs, it ran on the minds of those who thought it was there. And so, the legend grew, not just of a beast, but of a terror that had no form, no name, but a voice that echoed through the moor, whispering in the wind, calling to those who dared to listen. I've heard from several locals that in the dead of night, they've seen a large black hound, not quite solid, darting through the mist near the moor. It's not the kind of thing you'd tell your grandchildren, but it's the kind of thing that stays with you. One man said he was out for a walk when the hound appeared suddenly, its breath visible in the cold air, and it barked like a man, not a beast. He didn't run. He just stood there, heart pounding, waiting for it to vanish. Some say the hound is the spirit of Stapleton, the escaped convict, and that it's not here to harm, but to warn. Others say it's the ghost of Sir Henry, trying to protect his family from the past. No one knows for sure, but the moor itself seems to remember. The hound is a warning, a whisper of the past, and a reminder that some stories are never fully told. We followed the trail of the hound, but the deeper we went, the more it seemed we were being watched. I swear, the air felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. The police had found a boot print in the mud, but it wasn't the size of a man's. It was smaller, and it led to nothing. I couldn't help but wonder what if the hound wasn't just a beast, but a messenger. One night, I woke to the sound of barking, but there was no dog. Just a low, guttural growl coming from the walls. I reached for the lamp, and in the flicker, I saw something move in the corner of my eye like a shadow with eyes. The locals said the hound had been seen in the hills, but always at the edge of sight. I asked them if they ever saw its eyes. They all said the same thing, too bright, too human, like a man in a beast's skin. We found a journal in the library written by a local doctor who had vanished years ago. It spoke of a curse tied to the family, and a hound that wasn't just a beast, it was a symbol, a warning, a reckoning. And then there was the last entry unfinished. It spoke of a name we'd never heard before, a name that wasn't in the family tree. Just a whisper, a name that felt like a door opening in the dark. You know, the real mystery isn't the hound. It's the one thing that's always been left out of the story. A detail so small, it's almost invisible. But it's the one that never gets explained. It's the way Stapleton's letters were found. No fingerprints, no clues, just a stack of papers neatly folded in the middle of the moor, like they were placed there by someone who knew exactly where to hide them. You've heard the tales of the Baskerville hound, but what about the stories that never make it to the books? Some say it wasn't a beast at all, but a man in a mask, playing tricks on the wealthy and the foolish. Others whisper that the hound was just a symbol, a warning of the family's cursed bloodline. Some say the real curse was the greed of the Baskervilles and the hound was the price they paid for their sins. You might think the stories are just old superstition, but some locals still swear they've seen a shadow move where no one should be, or heard a howl in the night that doesn't belong to any animal. So, what do you think? Was it a beast, a man, or something else entirely? The Moors have always had their secrets, and some say the hound is still waiting for the next story to be told. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that never get answered. What if the hound was never real, and the Baskervilles were just trying to protect something they didn't understand? The family letters, the sketches, the warnings, all of it seems to point to a secret buried beneath the estate. But what? A curse? A hidden treasure? Or something far more personal, like a truth that was too dangerous to share? Even today, people still claim to hear the hound's howl in the night. But is it the wind, the imagination, or something that never left the moor at all? The line between myth and memory has always been thin here. And so, the mystery lingers not because it's unsolvable, but because it's never been meant to be. The Baskervilles may have died, but their story, and the shadows that follow it, live on in every unanswered question and every whisper in the dark. You know, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that don't end, like a shadow that lingers just long enough to make you turn your head. And sometimes, the hound isn't in the moors, it's in your own heart, pacing, waiting for you to look away. Remember, the moors are vast, and the echoes are endless, but so are the stories we carry with us. Now, let's light another candle. The next tale is waiting, just beyond the mist. You've heard of the haunted spots in the South, old plantations, ghostly plantation mist, and the whispers of the enslaved. But what if I told you there's a place where the dead still sing in the wind, and their songs are written in the bones of the earth? This place is called the Caddo Nation's burial ground, where the ancestors of a once-thriving people now rest, their spirits bound to the land they loved and lost. Now, this land is quiet, too quiet. Locals say you can hear faint voices in the wind, and the air feels heavier than it should. Some say the dead are trying to speak, but the stories don't end there. Some say the spirits are not just the Caddo, they're the ones who were buried here, but never allowed to rest. And they're waiting for someone to listen. So, what do you think? Are the voices in the wind warnings, or just the echoes of a people who never got to say goodbye? You see, the Caddo people weren't just a tribe, they were a people of great wisdom, deep spiritual connection, and an intricate way of life that thrived for centuries in what is now Texas and Louisiana. They built their villages along rivers, lived in earthwork mounds, and worshipped the sun, moon, and the great spirit of the land. Their language, their traditions, their stories, they were all woven into the fabric of the earth. But their story was cut short by the arrival of European settlers who saw their land as empty and their people as obstacles to progress. The Caddo were displaced, their villages burned, and their sacred sites desecrated. And so, their graves were forgotten, their voices silenced, their stories buried beneath layers of history and silence. But the land remembers, and the echoes of their past still linger in the wind and the trees. You know how sometimes the wind carries a sound that doesn't belong to the trees? That's what it was, low, like a whisper, but not from the leaves. It came from the earth itself. The workers at the site had heard it before, but they dismissed it as the wind. Not this time. It was louder, more insistent, like a voice trying to break through the silence. The next day, the ground had shifted, not in a way that made sense. It was like the earth had been disturbed by something that didn't belong to this world. They tried to cover it up, but the land would not be silenced. It was as if the earth itself was trying to remember something it had been buried too long to forget. And then, the first body was found. Not by accident, not by mistake. It was as if the earth had finally decided to speak. You've heard the stories of the Caddo, but have you ever wondered what happened to the ones who vanished without a trace? The ones who left no bones, no whispers, just silence. In 1835, the Caddo were forced to leave their sacred lands. Some say they were taken by force, others say they were led into the woods with promises of safety. But where did they go? And why did the trees still seem to hold their breath? One woman, a Caddo healer, was last seen at the edge of the village, her hands full of herbs, her eyes searching the horizon. She never returned. The elders say she was taken by spirits, or perhaps by men who no longer wanted her to remember. Her disappearance is a wound in the land, a place where the earth refuses to speak. The trees whisper her name, but only if you listen closely, and only if you're brave enough to follow the silence. So if you're wondering why Caddo graves are never found, maybe it's because the ones who were taken never wanted to be found. Or maybe the land has chosen to remember them in its own way. I've heard from a retired teacher in Shreveport who claimed she saw a flicker of light near the old Caddo burial ground. She said it wasn't the sun, not the moon, but something else like a ghostly flame in the dark. Another witness, a local historian, told me about hearing whispers at night while walking the trails. He said the voices were in a language he didn't recognize, but they always seemed to be calling his name. One woman claimed she saw a woman in traditional Caddo attire standing at the edge of the burial site. She said the woman looked right at her, and then vanished like smoke. And then there's the man who said he felt the ground tremble beneath him. Not once, but twice, as if something beneath the earth was stirring, waiting to be remembered. These aren't just stories. They're echoes, reminders that some graves are never truly buried, and some voices are never truly silenced. We followed the whispers of the Caddo through the overgrown cemetery, where time had draped the stones in moss and memory. It was quiet, too quiet, as if the earth itself held its breath. One of the guides, a retired archaeologist, said he'd felt something shift in the soil the night before. He'd been alone, and the wind had howled like a mourning spirit. As we dug, the ground gave way to a hidden chamber's stone walls, damp and cold, with carvings that seemed to pulse with the memory of the Caddo people. We found nothing but silence, yet the air felt heavier, as if the chamber itself was holding its breath, waiting for the stories to be heard. Then, as we left, the wind picked up again, and for a moment I thought I heard voices soft, layered, like the wind carrying the echoes of a long-lost language. You know, the one thing that's never been explained is why the bones were found in such a perfect line, like they were arranged by someone with a plan, not just left to the elements. They say the Caddo were spiritual people, but this felt more like a message, like the earth itself was trying to tell us something we've all missed. It's like the land is holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally listen, to finally understand what was buried here, not just bones, but a story that's been waiting to be told. And that's the thing, isn't it? We've spent so long trying to find answers in the past, but sometimes the real mystery is why we've never asked the right questions. Some say the Caddo spirits aren't just buried in the earth, they're buried in the stories we tell. You ever notice how the same old legends keep popping up, like the girl who vanished near the old burial mounds? There's talk of a hidden path, a trail only the dead can see, leading to a place where time stands still and the earth remembers. Some say it's a secret way to the Caddo's final resting place. Theories run wild. Some say the spirits are trying to protect the land. Others think the Caddo left warnings in the bones of the earth. But one thing is clear, these stories don't fade, they linger like a chill in the night. And if you're ever in the area, don't be surprised if someone tells you, you can hear them at night, just a whisper, like the wind, but it sounds like a name. The Caddo's echoes aren't just in the past, they're in the air, in the silence, in the way the land holds its secrets close. And sometimes, it's not the ghosts that scare you, it's the feeling that you've been listening all along. You've heard the whispers of the Caddo, but what if the truth is buried deeper than anyone imagined? What if the land itself remembers, and the silence is not an absence, but a warning? The remains of the burial mounds have been unearthed, but the stories of the Caddo are still incomplete. Who was buried where? And why did the winds carry the sound of voices not from the past, but from the present? Some say the Caddo were not just buried, but honored. Others say they were taken by disease, by war, by the very land they once called home. And now, the land speaks, but in a language we can't yet understand. We can't dig up the past, but we can listen. And sometimes, the earth doesn't need to be opened to tell its story. It just needs to be heard. You ever notice how the wind seems to carry whispers when it passes through old trees? It's as if the land itself remembers the stories it once held. Sometimes, the silence between the rustling leaves is louder than the wind itself. It's the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle, like something unseen is listening. It's not just the stories of the past that linger here, it's the weight of them, the way they settle into the bones of the earth, waiting for someone to listen. So when you're out there, remember, the land is alive, and sometimes it speaks in the language of silence. You've heard of haunted castles, but have you ever heard of a place that screams? Dunfermline Abbey, Scotland, is said to have walls that cry out in the night. No one knows why, but they all agree it's not a sound you want to hear. Built in the 12th century, This abbey was once a place of learning and worship, but it's now a ruin, half swallowed by the earth and time. It's not the stones that haunt it, it's what the stones remember. Some say the cries are the voices of the monks who once lived here, trapped between life and death. Others say it's the spirits of the victims buried beneath the stone waiting for someone to listen. It's not just the screams you hear, it's the silence that follows. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if you're alone or if you're being watched. So, if you ever find yourself in the Scottish countryside, and you hear a cry that doesn't belong to the wind, remember, some walls don't just hold secrets. They hold voices that won't let go. You know, the abbey was built in the 12th century, not long after the Norman conquest. It was a place of power, but also of secrets. You can almost feel the weight of the stones, like they're holding on to something. The first abbot, William de Scone, had a vision literally. He claimed to see an angel telling him to build this place. But was it divine inspiration, or just a way to justify his rise to power? But the abbey wasn't just a place of prayer. It was a center for learning, and also a place where dark things happened. They say the monks kept a hidden library filled with forbidden texts, and that the walls began to scream the night someone tried to burn it down. The abbot's son, a young and ambitious man, was accused of heresy. He was locked in a cell beneath the abbey, and the walls began to echo with his cries. Some say they still hear him, even now. The abbey was abandoned in the 16th century, but not before a final tragedy. A fire broke out during a storm, and the monks fled, leaving behind their ghosts, their secrets, and the sound of their screams. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? A low, mournful sound, like a child's cry echoing through the stone. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the echo of the abbey's own hollows. It was something else entirely. At first, we thought it was the memory of the abbey itself. The walls had seen centuries of sorrow, of battles, of prayers, of pain. But this sound, it wasn't ancient. It was fresh, like a wound that hadn't healed yet. The sound would come and go, like a distant memory trying to be remembered. But it always left something behind. A chill in the air, a feeling of being watched, a sense that the walls weren't just holding time. They were holding something else. And then one evening, a woman who had come to visit said she heard it, not just once but twice. The first time, it was a child's voice. The second time, it was a woman's voice pleading. And when she asked who was there, the walls went silent. That's when the rumors started to spread. Some said the abbey was cursed, that it had been built on sacred ground. Others said it was a place where the dead still waited to be found. And still others said the walls were not just holding time, they were holding someone. One stormy night, a young monk named Brother Alistair vanished without a sound. He was last seen in the cloisters, whispering to the stones as if they might answer his prayers. His brothers claimed he was chasing the echo of a voice, a whisper that came from the walls themselves. Some say it was the voice of a girl who died in the abbey centuries ago. They searched the abbey for days, but no trace of Brother Alistair was found. His belongings were still in his cell, untouched, as though he had simply vanished into the walls. Some say he was taken by the abbey's ghost, a girl who never left, trapped between the stone and the sky. Others say he was never there at all, just a man who walked too close to the edge of the unknown. To this day, the walls of Dunfermline Abbey still whisper. Some say they're calling for him. Others say they're calling for you. I've spoken to dozens of locals, and not one can explain why the walls of Dunfermline Abbey seem to echo with voices. Some say they hear a woman's cry in the dead of night. Others claim to hear laughter that fades into silence. One woman, who lived nearby in the 1980s, swore she saw a figure standing at the base of the abbey, just before the wall began to scream. She didn't report it, but she never spoke of the place again. A few years back, a young couple took a midnight walk near the abbey and claimed they heard the walls whisper their names. They turned around, but there was no one there. The next day, they left the town without saying a word. I've also spoken to a retired priest who said the abbey has always been a place of strange occurrences. He told me, the walls remember, they never forget. These accounts are not just stories. They're echoes of something real, something that lingers in the stones and the silence between the screams. We started with the usual suspects: old records, clergy reports, and a local historian who claimed to have heard the walls moan during a storm. But nothing matched the screams. Nothing explained the sound. Then we found the audio files. A low, guttural moan recorded in the 1970s and a 1990s clip of a man shouting, "I can't stop it. It's in the walls," before the line cuts out. The local priest said the abbey was built on a pagan site, and the screams might be the land remembering its old stories. But he also warned about the cold in the chapel, how the air felt like it was holding its breath. We hired a sound engineer to test the acoustics. The walls resonated in strange ways, and when he played a low tone, the entire structure seemed to vibrate, like it was alive and listening. The final clue came from the caretaker's daughter. She said she once heard the walls scream at night, and the sound wasn't from the abbey, it came from the earth beneath it, like something was trying to break free. You ever notice how some secrets are so heavy, they don't just stay in the walls, they settle in the air, like dust in a forgotten room? There's one thing about Dunfermline Abbey that no one can explain, not even the historians. It's not the stones, not the bones, not even the whispers that echo through the corridors. It's something more elusive, more personal, like a name that's been forgotten, or a face that refuses to fade. And that's the thing about Dunfermline. It doesn't just haunt you with ghosts. It haunts you with questions that never get answered, like the one detail that has never been explained. So, if you're ever in the area, I'd say take a moment. Look closely. Maybe the answer's there, just waiting for someone to finally listen. They say the walls here don't just echo, they scream. Some say it's the voices of the nuns who were burned alive in the 16th century. Others whisper it's the ghost of a child trapped in the very stones that built this place. The locals still tell tales of the screaming walls, a sound that rises at night, echoing through the ancient halls like a child's cry. Some say it's just the wind, but the old ones know better. You can almost feel it, the weight of history pressing down on these stones. It's not just a place, it's a memory, a story, a whisper that won't let go. And if you're ever here at night, don't be surprised if you hear the walls speak. They've got a lot to say, and they've got a lot of time to tell it. You know, sometimes the real mystery isn't the ghost, but the silence that follows. No one's ever found the missing women, and the walls still echo with their absence. They say the abbey was built on a battlefield, but maybe it was built on something else, something that still whispers in the stones. Even the experts can't agree on what happened. Some say it was a cover-up. Others say the abbey itself is the keeper of a secret that can't be solved. And so the mystery lingers, not in the cold case files but in the whispers of the stones. The abbey still has a story to tell, and it's not finished yet. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers. Did you ever notice how silence can be the most unsettling sound of all? And just like that, the walls of Dunfermline Abbey seem to exhale their secrets one breath at a time. What do you think they're saying to you just now? There's a kind of poetry in the way the past lingers, isn't there? Like it's still waiting for someone to listen, to truly hear. And as we turn the page, the next story waits just beyond the shadows. What will it whisper to you when the world is still? Stay with me, friend. The stories are just beginning. You've heard of haunted castles, but have you ever heard of a place where the walls themselves scream? Dunfermline Abbey, Scotland, where history and horror collide in the most unsettling way. Built in the 12th century, this abbey was once a place of prayer and power, but now it's a place where whispers echo through the corridors and the silence feels heavy with secrets. Some say the screams come from the nuns who were imprisoned here, others say it's the sound of the abbey's founder or the spirits of those who died in its dark history. Whatever the truth, the walls still echo with voices that no one can explain. If you're ever in the area, don't walk alone. The abbey doesn't just haunt the air, it haunts the soul, and it never lets go. You know, the abbey wasn't always a place of screams and shadows. It started as a beacon of faith, a place where monks copied sacred texts by candlelight, and the air smelled of incense and hope. Built in the 12th century by a Scottish king, it was meant to be a place of peace, not power, but sometimes, even the holiest of places can be built on blood. The monks who lived here weren't just scholars, they were warriors too. They fought for their faith, and sometimes that meant fighting against people who didn't believe in it. But even in the best of times, there were secrets buried beneath the stones. Some of those secrets came to light in the form of whispers, and others in the form of disappearances. And so, the abbey became more than a place of prayer. It became a place of power, of pain, and eventually of sorrow. A sorrow that still echoes through its walls. And now, as you sit here listening, you might just feel that same sorrow and maybe, just maybe, hear the walls whispering their own story. You remember the silence that settled over Dunfermline Abbey after the last bell had rung. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't just fall, it presses down like the weight of centuries. Then, just as the last light faded, the wind picked up. Not a breeze, but a whisper, something that sounded like a child's laugh, or maybe a sigh of sorrow, coming from the stones themselves. The next morning, the nuns found the first mark. It was carved into the stone wall near the chapel, a simple symbol like a hand, or a heart, or maybe a tear. No one could say for sure what it meant. It wasn't just the marks. The air had changed. It was colder, sharper, like the silence had turned into something more tangible. You could almost feel it watching you, waiting. And then, one evening, the wind stopped. The silence returned, but this time, it was louder, deeper, as if the abbey itself was holding its breath. You've heard the whispers of Dunfermline Abbey, but now you're standing where the silence is broken by something far worse than wind. A woman's voice, high and keening, echoes through the stone corridors like a ghost trying to find its way home. The scream doesn't fade, it builds, a sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It's not the cry of a child, nor the wail of a lover, but something deeper, something raw, like a soul caught between two worlds. They say she was taken by the Abbey's dark history, by the spirits of the women who had been buried in its crypt. But some believe she was never truly lost, only waiting for the right moment to be heard again. To this day, those who enter the Abbey at night report hearing the scream, sometimes just once, sometimes many times. It's a sound that lingers in the air, like the last note of a lullaby that never ends. And if you're lucky, you'll hear it once. If you're not, you'll hear it every night, until you join the silence that has kept its secret for centuries. Some say the screams don't come from the walls, but from the people who have heard them. A retired teacher from nearby told me she once heard the sound in the dead of night, so clear she thought someone was in her house. She called the police, but they found nothing. The sound faded, and the silence that followed was louder than the scream itself. Some say the walls remember. There was a farmer who claimed to hear the screams every spring, just before the crops grew. He said the sound was like a child's cry, but it didn't stop. It just got louder. He tried to ignore it at first, but after a year, he said the sound stopped him from sleeping. He told his wife it was a warning. She didn't believe him. He didn't either. The last time someone heard the screams was in 1995. A young woman who lived in the town said it woke her up. She said it was like the walls were trying to speak to her. She never told anyone, not even her family. She said it wasn't just a scream, it was a name she didn't know, but somehow she understood. We started with the basics, asking the caretaker if he'd ever heard anything. He laughed, but his eyes were shadowed. I've heard the walls breathe, but never scream. The first night, we brought in a sound meter, and it picked up something strange, a low, rhythmic hum, like the walls were humming in a forgotten language. Then, the temperature dropped. Not just a chill, but a real, physical shift, like the air itself had turned cold and heavy. We found old records, letters from 1550, talking about a nun who vanished during a storm, and a priest who claimed he saw her shadow on the wall, screaming. There was something about the walls, though. They didn't just hold stories, they seemed to remember them, and maybe whisper them back to us. We left with more questions than answers, and the feeling that the Abbey was still waiting for someone to listen. You see, the one detail that has never been explained is the sound. It wasn't just a whisper, it wasn't just a scream. It was something that cut through the silence like a knife, and no one knows what it was. Some say it was the voice of a child, others claim it was a woman in distress. But no one can say for sure. It's like the Abbey itself is holding its breath, waiting for the sound to return. They've tried everything: microphones, sensors, even silence. But the sound never comes when they're listening. It only comes when no one is there to hear it. And that's the one thing that keeps the stories going. Not the ghosts, not the history, but the sound. The one thing that's never been explained, and never will be. Some say the walls of Dunfermline Abbey don't just echo with the past, they scream. You've heard the stories. But have you ever wondered why the Abbey's stones still hold their breath? The locals tell of a hidden chamber, sealed for centuries, where the last abbess made her final stand. Some say she still waits behind a stone, her voice trapped in the cracks like a whisper in the dark. You've heard the stories, but have you ever stood in the Abbey at night? The silence is so thick, it feels like it could swallow you whole. And when you think you hear something, a whisper, a sigh, a cry, it's like the walls are alive. The theories go on, but one thing is certain. The Abbey isn't just a place. It's a memory, a story, a scream that won't fade. And if you listen closely, you might just hear it too. Sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that remain. What if the Abbey isn't just whispering to us, but waiting for someone to finally listen? Every year, the echoes grow louder. Some say the walls are trying to tell us something, but no one's been able to figure out what. Has anyone ever really listened? The silence now feels like a promise that if we just stay a little longer, the truth might finally come out of the shadows. And maybe that's the real mystery. Not the ghosts, but the silence that follows. The silence that says, I'm still here. So, what do you think? Are we ready to listen? Or are we still afraid to find out what's really behind those screaming walls? You've heard the whispers of Dunfermline Abbey, felt the chill of its ancient stones, and wondered if the walls still hold their secrets. But sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones that end with a question, not an answer. The Abbey may be silent now, but the echoes of the past are never far. Some say the voices you hear are not the voices of the living, but of the ones who were never allowed to rest. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a feeling the next story is waiting just beyond the next hill, and it's not going to be very quiet. Stay warm, stay curious, and don't let the silence scare you because sometimes the quietest places hold the biggest truths. You've heard of haunted abbeys, but have you ever heard of a place that whispers to the dead? Tewkesbury Abbey, nestled in the shadow of the Cotswolds, is said to be the home of a ghost that never stops wailing. The abbey was built in the 12th century, but its history is far darker. It was the site of a brutal civil war, and the blood of many spilled upon its sacred grounds. Some say the ghosts of those who died there still wander its halls. Legend says that if you stand in the cloisters at night, you can hear the ghostly wails echoing through the stone. They're not just sounds, they're voices pleading, warning, and crying out for justice. Why does the abbey wail? What tragedy, what injustice has left its spirit trapped in this place? And why does the sound never stop, even in the dead of night? You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered if the wails are just a warning or a call to something far more sinister waiting in the silence? You know, the abbey was built in the 12th century, but it wasn't always a place of peace. It started as a Norman fortress, then became a monastery, and eventually a place of worship. But there's something about the stones that seem to hold more than just history. The first monks who lived there were known for their piety, but they also had a dark side. There were rumors of secret rituals, forbidden love, and a few people who never left the abbey alive. The walls, they say, remember everything. Over the centuries, the abbey became a place of pilgrimage for the curious, the superstitious, and the desperate. Some came to pray, others to seek answers, and a few, I think, came to find out what really happened to the people who lived there. And so the legend grew. The wails you hear in the night, the whispers in the halls, the cold that lingers in the corners, those are the echoes of a place that was once alive and still is. You know how sometimes the air just feels different, like the world has paused for a moment? Well, that's exactly what happened that morning at Tewkesbury Abbey. The silence was so thick, it felt like the stones themselves were holding their breath. The monks had been gone for weeks, and the place had been left to the elements. But the moment the first visitors stepped through the gate, they felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold air. The first real sign came when the caretaker found a small, folded note on the floor of the chapel. It was written in a shaky hand, and it simply read, "I'm still here." No name, no date, just that one line, written in blood. No one believed it at first, but the caretaker said the note had been placed there by the altar, just where the monks used to kneel. And the moment they read it, something in the air shifted like the walls themselves had exhaled. It was then that the caretaker heard it again, the whisper, but louder this time. Not from the walls, but from the very air itself. A voice, not of the living, but of the dead, speaking in a language no one could understand. You see it now, the great stone archway, weathered and cracked, is silent witness to centuries of whispered secrets. The air feels heavy, like it's holding its breath, and the faintest echo of a child's laughter lingers in the stillness. One stormy night, a young girl vanished from these very walls. No one saw her leave, no one heard her cry, just the wind and the sound of something small and fragile being carried away by the dark. They say the abbey's stones remember, that the walls have ears and a heart, and that they've carried the weight of so many lost voices, so many untold stories, until they couldn't bear it anymore. And then, just as the bells told the hour, the walls began to weep. Not with water, but with sound low, mournful, and full of a sorrow that has echoed through time, unanswered. So now, if you hear it, don't run. Let's run. Because sometimes, the walls don't just remember, they're waiting for someone to finally tell the story. I've spoken to dozens of people who say they've heard the wails at Tewkesbury Abbey. Some said they were there at night, alone, and heard the sound from the stone walls themselves. One woman told me she was visiting with her granddaughter, and the sound came just as they passed the old chapel. It wasn't a scream, it was a cry, like a child, echoing from the walls. Another told me she heard the sound while she was painting the abbey's cloisters. She said it felt like the walls were alive, breathing, and calling her name. There's one account I won't forget. A man said he was there on a stormy night, and the wails grew louder, like a chorus of voices pleading for help from the past. And then there was the man who claimed he heard the sound from his car miles away and turned around to find the abbey glowing in the distance like it was calling him home. We arrived at Tewkesbury Abbey with a small team, each of us clutching our own theories. The silence here was heavier than the stone, and the air felt like it held its breath. We began with the oldest records, but what we found wasn't in the books, it was etched into the walls themselves, in a language that had long since been forgotten. We found no bodies, no evidence of a murder, but the walls seemed to remember something. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something older, something that didn't belong to this world. The most unsettling thing we found wasn't in the records or the walls, it was in the silence. Sometimes, when we were alone, the walls would begin to whisper, not in words but in a sound like a child's voice lost and calling. It wasn't until we left that we realized we'd all heard it too, a sound that didn't belong to this world, and that had followed us out of the abbey, lingering in our minds long after we'd gone. You know, the thing that's been bugging me the whole time is this one little detail. No one seems to know why the walls started wailing. It's like the abbey itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question. They say it began after a fire destroyed the cloister in 1650, but no one can confirm it. Some say it's a memory of the monks. Others say it's the abbey's way of mourning its own silence. But I keep wondering, what were they trying to say? What did they want us to hear? You ever notice how the sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once? Like the walls are whispering in a language we've forgotten, or maybe a language that only the dead can understand. I've spoken to historians, archivists, even a few locals who grew up near the abbey. None of them can explain it. But I keep thinking maybe it's not about the abbey at all. Maybe it's about the people who built it and the secrets they left behind. So, what do you think? Are we just hearing the echoes of the past, or is there something still living inside these walls, waiting for someone to listen? Some say the wails come from a young girl who drowned in the abbey's moat centuries ago. Others believe it's the ghost of a nun who was locked in a cell and never heard again. What do you think it is, dear listener? A cry for help, or a cry for justice? There's a local legend that the abbey's stones are alive, and they remember every secret buried beneath them. Some say the walls weep when the wind is right, as if they're trying to tell us something we're too afraid to hear. Many believe the wails are just the wind, but others swear they hear a child's voice calling for help, especially on cold winter nights. It's said the abbey listens, and the walls remember. So, what do you think, dear listener? Is it a ghost, a memory, or just the abbey's way of saying it's still here? The walls may never stop whispering, but they may never tell the whole story. And yet, the mystery remains unresolved, a whisper in the stones that no one can quite catch. What exactly did the girl see, and why was she so afraid? Did she run away, or was she taken? The police found nothing, but the locals still speak in hushed tones of the girl who vanished in the night. Was it a prank, or something far darker? No one can say for sure. To this day, no one knows what happened to her, but the abbey remembers, and it waits patient, cold, and full of stories that refuse to be forgotten. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself near Tewkesbury, take a moment to listen. Sometimes the walls have more to say than the people who live inside them. You ever notice how silence can be the most unsettling sound of all? Sometimes the absence of noise is louder than any scream. These walls have heard more than they've spoken. They've carried secrets through centuries, and now they whisper in the dark. So when you're alone with the dark, remember, you're never truly alone. The past is always listening. But don't worry, dear listener, we've got another tale waiting just beyond the next turn in the road. You ever heard of a village that vanished overnight? Tinynham, tucked in the Dorset Hills, was like that. A quiet, close-knit place where everyone knew your name and the wind seemed to whisper secrets through the trees. In 1943, the British government declared Tinynham a target for bombing practice. They gave the villagers just 2 weeks to leave. Some say they packed their belongings, others say they were forced out, but no one remembers exactly how it happened. Now, decades later, Tinynham stands empty, a silent witness to history. The villagers are gone, but the house is still there, waiting. Some say you can hear their laughter in the wind, or feel their presence in the empty rooms. But why is Tinynham still so quiet? What happened to those who lived there? And why does the wind seem to carry their voices, even now? That's the question we're here to answer. You know, the village wasn't always so quiet. Back in 1650, Tinynham was a bustling little place, full of life and laughter. But then came the plague, and it changed everything. The plague took many lives, but it wasn't just the sickness that left its mark. The villagers, desperate and scared, turned to the church for answers, and some made terrible choices. The last known resident, a woman named Eleanor, left the village in the 18th century, fearing the ghosts that had begun to walk with her. She wrote a letter to her family, warning them of the dark forces that had taken root. And so, Tinynham was abandoned, left to the elements and the whispers of the past. But the village never truly left its people. It lingers in the fog, in the silence, and in the stories that refuse to fade. You remember how the nights grew longer, and the shadows seemed to stretch just a little more than they should. The wind would whisper through the trees like it was trying to say something, but no one ever listened. The villagers started to notice things: crops that didn't grow, animals that ran away, and children who wouldn't sleep. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. The village priest said it was a warning, a sign from above. But no one believed him, not really. Not when the old well started to whisper in the dead of night. And then the first ghost was seen. A woman in a white dress standing at the edge of the woods, her hands outstretched as if she were reaching for something or someone. The villagers tried to ignore it, but you could see the fear in their eyes. The fear of something they could not explain, and something that was not going to let them forget. You know, sometimes the most haunted places are the ones you expect. Tinynham, with its quiet, windswept fields and that old stone church, seems peaceful until you hear the whispers in the wind. In 1943, the village was evacuated overnight. Soldiers came with orders to abandon everything. No one was allowed to stay. And yet, some people never left. Now locals say that if you walk the same path Elsie took, you might hear her voice calling your name. But when you turn around, there is no one there, only the wind and the silence that follows. Some say the wind carries her sorrow, and that if you listen closely, you can almost hear her crying. But you'd have to be brave enough to stay and hear it, and brave enough to leave afterwards. I've heard from a retired school teacher in Dorset who claims she saw a shadowy figure in the village square at dusk, just before the last light faded. She said it moved like smoke, but its eyes, oh, those eyes were too clear to be a trick of the light. Another witness, a local historian, swore he heard whispers in the wind as he walked the old paths. He said they were not the wind at all, but voices calling his name over and over, like a lullaby gone wrong. One of the most unsettling accounts came from a young girl who grew up in Tinynham. She said she saw a figure standing by the old well at night, just outside her window. It never moved, but it watched right through the glass. And then there's the farmer who said he saw a glowing light in the field one night, hovering just above the earth. He said it looked like a lantern, but the flame never flickered. He tried to follow it, but it vanished before he could reach it. Each of these accounts is a thread in the fabric of Tinynham's past. They don't tell us what happened, but they remind us that some stories are never truly told, only remembered. We followed the whispers of the past, tracing footprints through the dust of time, until we found the old mill, its walls whispering secrets like a lullaby. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something older, something that clung to the walls like a memory. The names matched the missing villagers, and the dates. Some were missing on the same day the village was evacuated during the war. But what really made our skin crawl was the final line. They didn't vanish, they were taken, and the mill remembers. We left the mill with more questions than answers, the wind howling like a ghost trying to tell us something we weren't ready to hear. You've heard the stories, you've seen the photos, but there's one thing that still haunts the villagers. No one knows what the soldiers took with them that night. They say the last thing the villagers saw was the black van pulling up and the soldiers' boots on the gravel. But no one remembers what they carried out with them. You might think it doesn't matter, but when you're living with a place that holds secrets, even the smallest mystery can feel like a shadow in the corner of your eye. So what do you think they took? And why do you think the village still feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for someone to ask the right question? Some say the villagers still whisper about the ghost of the last mayor who vanished in the woods during a storm. Was he lost, or did he walk willingly into the dark? You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered if they're just echoes of a deeper truth? Others claim the disappearances are linked to the old ironworks. Rumors say the ghosts of workers still haunt the site, trapped by their unfinished labor. But why would they choose to linger rather than move on? There's even a theory that the village itself is cursed, a place where time bends and the dead refuse to let go. But if that's true, why do the living still come here, drawn by the same pull that once led the lost to their fate? So, what do you think? Is the village a place of mystery or a warning? The stories may never be fully answered, but the echoes still linger, waiting for someone to listen. You followed this trail through time, through stone and soil, through shadow and silence. But the truth, it's still hidden in the quiet spaces between the stories. The villagers never spoke of the missing children, but their eyes did. They'd meet your gaze and say nothing, but their silence was louder than any scream. The only clue is a single child's shoe, found buried near the old well, still clinging to the memory of a long-forgotten laugh. And so, the village sleeps, and the mystery lingers, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, and to finally speak the name that has been lost to time. You've walked through the silence of Tinynham, felt the weight of history in every stone. But sometimes, the greatest mysteries aren't in the past, they're in the quiet places we've forgotten. The village may be gone, but the stories linger. You can almost hear the wind whispering secrets through the hollows of the old houses. So, as we turn the page, remember this: some places are never truly empty, and some secrets are better left undisturbed. But don't worry, dear listener, the fire is still warm, the tea is still steeping, and the next tale is waiting just around the corner. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a village that vanished overnight? Tinynham, a quiet English hamlet, was evacuated in 1943, and to this day, its silence screams louder than any sound. Once a thriving community, Tinyham was chosen as a target for bombing during World War II. The villagers were given just a few days to leave, and their homes were left to the mercy of war and time. Now, decades later, the place is a ghost town, and some say the wind carries the whispers of those who were never truly gone. Tourists come to see the abandoned houses, but locals say the true horror isn't in the ruins, it's in the silence that lingers, like a memory you can't quite recall. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too, the faintest sound, like a voice calling from the past, but never quite reaching you. You know, the first time Tinyham was mentioned in records, it wasn't for ghosts or hauntings. It was for a small, quiet village, nestled in the heart of the Dorset countryside, where life moved at the pace of the seasons and the land itself seemed to hold its breath. In the 13th century, Tinyham was a place of simple joys, farming, harvests, and the occasional festival. But even then, there were whispers of strange things happening at night, like shadows moving where there was no one, and voices that could be heard but not seen. By the 1600s, Tinyham had grown a little. More people lived there, and more stories were told. Some said the village was cursed by a witch who had lived there long before. Others claimed it was haunted by a noble family that had been betrayed and murdered in the woods. But the real trouble started in 1943, when the British government decided to take Tinyham for a secret military project. They called it a strategic necessity. The villagers were given little time to prepare, and many were forced to leave their homes behind. The village was left empty, and for decades it was a ghost town. But the land, the trees, the very earth itself seemed to remember. And as the years passed, rumors began to grow that something was still there, waiting for the villagers to return. You remember how things started to shift, like the air itself grew heavier. The wind, once a gentle companion, began to whisper secrets only the trees could understand. The villagers started to notice things, strange lights flickering behind closed windows, doors creaking open on their own, and the occasional sound of laughter in the empty fields. Then came the sounds, deep, resonant hums that shook the very walls of the old manor, like the earth itself was trying to speak through stone. It was as if the land was holding its breath, waiting for something to wake up, something that had been sleeping for far too long. You ever heard of a place where the wind whispers secrets and the earth remembers the dead? Tinyham Village holds one of the most chilling stories of all time: what happened to the young girl who vanished without a sound. In 1943, a 7-year-old girl named Susan was last seen playing by the stream. Her mother found her gone, with only her school shoes by the water's edge. No screams, no struggle, just silence. Now, when the wind picks up, you can almost hear it soft, like a child's voice calling from the water. And if you listen closely, you might just hear the silence that never ended. Susan's story remains a mystery, but one thing's certain: the land of Tinyham remembers. And if you're ever there, listen for the silence that never ends. I spoke to a retired schoolteacher from Dorset who claimed she saw a figure in a long coat walking the path near Tinyham one winter evening. She said it vanished into the mist like a ghost. Another witness, a local fisherman, swore he heard whispers coming from the village church at dawn. He said the voices were too clear to be anything but human. One man, a former RAF officer, told me he saw a woman in the village square at night, standing by the old well. She didn't move when he approached, just stared at him like she knew exactly who he was. These aren't just stories. They're echoes of something real, something that lingers in the silence of Tinyham. You can almost hear the voices if you listen closely. The investigation began with a simple question: what happened to those who vanished from Tinyham? We followed the dust of the past, hoping to find a trail of answers, not just footprints in the mud. They found old letters tucked in the floorboards of the village school, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Words like screams and darkness were repeated, as if someone had tried to warn the world before it was too late. One night, the team reported hearing whispers in the wind, not from the trees or the hills, but from the very earth beneath their feet. It was as if the land itself was trying to speak. The deeper they dug, the more the past refused to stay buried. It was as though the village had never left and the people who vanished had never gone away at all. You know, there's one thing that has always haunted me more than the stories themselves. It's the silence. The silence that lingers after the last echo fades. No one can explain why the village was abandoned in 1943 or why the villagers left everything behind. Not even the locals seem to know the full truth. They say the village was taken by the war, but the truth is still buried in the silence, and no one has ever dared to dig it up. So here's the thing, dear listener, if you're ever in the area, be sure to listen closely, because sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that never speak. Some say the village silence is a cover for the dead still trapped in the woods, waiting for someone to hear their whispers. Others say it's the earth itself, holding its breath. There's a story about a farmer who vanished in the 1950s, and his wife claimed she heard his voice calling her from the hills. But no one believed her, and he was never found. Some say the land remembers the people who lived here, and when they're gone, it mourns in silence. Others say it's a trick of the wind, carrying voices from a time we can't quite reach. And then there are the ones who swear they've heard something, just a whisper, a sigh, or the sound of footsteps in an empty field. But no one ever knows where it came from. Maybe the silence isn't meant to be broken. Maybe it's a message, or a warning. Or maybe it's just the way the land remembers its own. You ever wonder what happens when a whole village vanishes? No rubble, no records, just silence where there should be life. The soldiers came in 1943, told them to pack up and leave. No explanation, just orders. Some say they were told to move for the war effort, others say it was something darker. Some say the village is cursed, that the people who left never truly left. Others say it's just a place waiting for someone to come back and listen. The mystery lingers, not in the horror of what happened, but in the silence that followed. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than screams. You can almost hear the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of a time long past. Sometimes, I think the village remembers its own silence better than we do. There's a strange comfort in knowing that some places are too quiet, too still. It's like the world holds its breath just a little longer when you're there. And if you ever find yourself wandering through a quiet village at dusk, don't be surprised if the wind carries a whisper. Just remember, it might be the village saying goodbye. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear something in the distance. Something that doesn't belong to this world. I'll be right back. You've heard the names, but let me take you to the place where it all began. Whitechapel, London, 1888. A fog-laden district, where gas lamps flicker like dying stars in the dark. This was a place of trade and tension, where the poor and the desperate lived side by side. But it was also a place of fear, where whispers of the unseen grew louder than the city's ever-present noise. Now, you may be thinking, what does a place like this have to do with you? Well, dear listener, it has everything to do with the stories that refuse to die and the ghosts that refuse to be forgotten. So, let's step back in time and let the fog settle on our shoulders. Because here, in Whitechapel, the night never truly ends. And the stories, well, they're just beginning. You know, the Whitechapel murders didn't start with Jack the Ripper. It began with a woman named Elizabeth Stride, who was just trying to make a living in a city that didn't care much for the poor. She wasn't the first to fall, but she was the first to be found. That's how it started. Someone found her, and the city had to reckon with what it had done. There were others too: Mary Ann Nicol, Annie Chapman, and more. Each one a piece of a puzzle that the city couldn't solve and couldn't forget. The killer was never caught, but the city never really stopped thinking about them. The Whitechapel murders became a story that lived in the bones of London and in the hearts of those who still walk those streets. And so, the history begins not with a scream, but with a silence that lingered long after the last body was found. You remember the first time you noticed something wasn't quite right. It was just after dusk, the kind of evening when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The air was thick, not with smoke or rain, but with a kind of silence that didn't feel natural, like the city had paused to listen. The next day, the news came. A body found near the docks, wrapped in a shawl, no ID, no clues, and then another, and another. People started whispering, not about the murders, but about the silence. The way the city seemed to hold its breath in the evenings, like it was waiting for something. You wondered if you had imagined it, but then you saw it again, and the silence didn't stop. It just grew louder. You followed the whispers through the alleyways of Whitechapel, but now, the air grows colder and the silence is heavier. A single street lamp flickers, casting long shadows over the cobblestone, as if the city itself is holding its breath. It was the night of the 3rd, and the air was thick with something more than rain. A woman, her face pale, her hands trembling, stood at the edge of the alley, watching the darkness swallow another life whole. You can almost hear the scream that never came. The body was never found, but the blood stains were. A single drop, smeared in the mud, a crimson whisper in the snow. A reminder that even in the darkest places, the truth has a way of lingering, like a ghost in the wind. The police dismissed it as a lover's quarrel, but the neighbors knew better. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the alley, as if the darkness itself had taken something precious and left a wound in the world. And so, the city moved on, but the memory didn't. It clings to the walls of the old buildings, the echo of footsteps in the night, and the whisper of a name that never made it to the headlines. You can almost hear it if you listen closely. One of the most chilling accounts came from a young nurse who claimed to have seen Jack the Ripper's face in the fog, pale and gaunt, like a man who'd been buried and exhumed. She swore the eyes were hollow, like the eyes of a dead man, and the breath that came from his lips smelled of decay and something sweet, like burnt sugar. He described the woman's face as both familiar and unknown, like a face from a dream that haunts you long after you've woken up. Some say the killer's face was never truly seen, but that only makes the stories more haunting, like a face that lives in the spaces between the lines of a poem. These accounts, though fragmented, all point to one truth. The killer wasn't just a man in a mask. He was a presence, a ghost in the fog, lingering in the stories we tell to remember. The investigation began with a single thread: Joseph Barnett's pocket watch, found half buried in the mud near the Thames. It was the only clue that tied the victims together, and it seemed to hum with a strange, almost living energy. Officers combed the streets of Whitechapel, but the city was silent, as if holding its breath. The fog clung to the cobblestones, and the air smelled of damp wool and old blood. The more they dug, the more the record seemed to shift. Names vanished, dates changed, and the official reports read like a script written by someone who had already known the ending. One officer swore he saw a shadow in the alley where the last victim was found. It moved like smoke, and when he turned, it was gone, leaving only the smell of burnt sugar and iron. The investigation grew colder than the Thames in winter. The killer had left no trace, but the city had remembered. And sometimes, a city remembers more than it should. You know, the thing that haunts me most isn't the blood or the bodies, it's the one detail that's never been explained. The one thing that should have been found, but wasn't. They found the bodies, the tools, the notes, but not the final clue. Not the one thing that would have tied it all together. Like a puzzle missing its last piece. Maybe it was never meant to be found. Maybe that's why it's still out there, whispering in the dark, waiting for someone to ask the right question. And that's the one thing that keeps the Whitechapel murders alive: not the bodies, not the names, but the mystery. The one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the tales of Jack the Ripper, but what about the whispers that say the true killer was a woman, or that the murders were never even real? These stories keep the fires burning, even when the truth is buried. Some say the killer was a doctor, others a jealous lover. Theories swirl like fog, and every new clue just makes the mystery deeper, not easier to solve. But there's one thing we all know for sure: the Whitechapel murders left a mark on the world, and even now, the streets still echo with the ghosts of those who were lost. So, what do you think? Are we chasing ghosts, or are we uncovering the truth that history tried to bury? Even now, the Whitechapel murders remain a ghost in the attic of history, a question without an answer. You've followed the trail, but there's still a shadow that won't leave the room. The case has been reopened, re-examined, and reburied a dozen times. You wonder, what if the real killer is still walking among us, unseen, unchained? There are no graves for the victims, no closure for the families. You feel it, don't you? That pull toward the unknown, that whisper that the past is never really gone. The mystery lingers, not because it's unsolvable, but because it's still waiting. Waiting for someone to listen, to feel, to remember. You've heard the echoes of Whitechapel, but have you ever wondered what the silence sounds like? Sometimes, the most haunting stories are the ones that never make it to the page. We talk about ghosts, but what if the real mystery is the one that never got solved? There's a poetry in the unsolved, isn't there? But don't worry, dear listener, there are always more stories waiting, just beyond the next corner or the next chapter. So, if you're ever lost in thought or haunted by a name, just remember there's always a story waiting, and a story that's waiting for you. You've heard of places that hold secrets, but Tineham? That's a village that holds silence. You ever wondered what happens when a whole town is just gone? It was evacuated in 1943 during the war and never rebuilt. Now it's a ghost town, but the air here feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to wake up. Some say the wind whispers through the hollows, carrying voices from a time that never ended. Others say the silence is the loudest sound of all. You can't help but feel like you're being watched, even when no one is there. It's not just the silence, it's the feeling that something, or someone, is still here. So, what do you think? Are you brave enough to walk those empty streets and hear what the wind is trying to tell you? You see it now, the old village square, just as it was in 1650 when the first stone was laid. The villagers, hardy and wary, gathered to watch the foundation being dug. They called it Tineham for the river that ran through it, but they also called it the Place of Shadows. The village was built on land that had been disputed for centuries. The locals claimed it belonged to them, but the crown said otherwise. The king's men came to settle the dispute, bringing with them a group of soldiers and a mysterious priest. The priest, Father Eustace, was said to have a gift for seeing things others couldn't. He claimed the land was cursed, that the spirits of the dead still roamed it. The villagers laughed, but the soldiers grew uneasy. Strange whispers were heard at night, and the animals would not stay in their pens. The king's men built the village anyway, but they left quickly, fearing for their lives. Some said the priest had cursed them, others said the spirits had taken control of the land. The village, now called Tinyham, was left to the people, but the whispering walls had already begun. And so, Tinyham was born, not as a place of peace, but as a place of whispers, of shadows, and of stories that would echo through the generations. The walls remembered, and the villagers learned to listen. You know how sometimes the walls seem to hum with a life of their own? Well, the villagers of Tinyham began to notice that their homes were doing just that, whispering, almost like they were trying to tell a secret. It started with just a few voices, like a breeze through the trees, but soon the whispers grew louder and the villagers could almost make out words. They were asking for help. The more they listened, the more the whispers changed. They spoke of a tragedy, of a loss that had never been acknowledged, and of a place that had been forgotten. And then, one by one, the villagers began to vanish, not with a scream or a shout, but quietly, as if they had simply been taken by the very walls they once called home. You ever wonder if the walls were just trying to tell us something? Or if they were warning us before it was too late? You remember how the wind used to howl through the old stone cottages? Well, one autumn, it carried something else, a voice, low and mournful, calling from the woods. It was the last time anyone heard from the young farmer, Thomas Hardy. Thomas was known for his kindness, but he vanished without a trace. The villagers searched for days, but the forest swallowed his trail like a dark secret. Some say he was taken by the woods, others say he was never there at all. No body was ever found, and no one dared to return to the woods after that. The locals began to whisper Thomas wasn't lost, he was called asterisk. And the trees, they remember everything. Even now, when the wind rises, some say they hear his voice again, soft and pleading, just before the silence returns. And if you listen closely, you might hear it too. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to hear the whispers in Tinyham. One woman, a retired teacher, told me she'd wake up in the middle of the night, hearing her own name called from the walls. She'd get up, walk to the window, and find nothing but silence. Another man, who lived there in the 70s, swore he could feel the house breathing. He said the walls would vibrate when he was alone, as if the house itself was trying to tell him something he didn't understand. One man, a local historian, told me he once saw a shadow move in the attic during a storm. He said it looked like a child, but when he went to check, there was no one there. He still dreams about it. And then there's the woman who said she saw a figure standing at the front door, dressed in 1940s clothes. She didn't open it. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the door, for what felt like hours. We followed the trail of old photographs, and the first thing we found was a weathered map of Tinyham, marked with strange symbols and faded red lines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The map led us to a forgotten stone wall, covered in ivy and lichen, where the wind seemed to whisper secrets only the earth could hear. As we stood there, the wind picked up, and the air grew thick with an almost tangible weight, as if the past had returned to claim its due. We found a rusted key tucked beneath a loose stone, and when we tried it in the lock of the old mill nearby, it turned with a sound like a sigh. Inside, the dust had settled over decades of silence, and the walls seemed to watch us, holding their breath for the return of something long forgotten. You know, the most haunting thing about Tinyham isn't the ghosts or the stories, it's the one thing no one can explain. It's the way the wind carries a voice, not through the trees, but through the stones themselves. They say the wind is just the wind, but you can hear it clearly. It's not the same as the wind in the fields. It's like it's speaking from the walls, from the very bones of the village. No one knows where the voice comes from, and that's what makes it so unsettling. It's not a sound that fades, it lingers, like a memory you can't quite place. Some say it's the villagers' voices trapped in the stones, still waiting to be heard. Others say it's something older, something that was never meant to be spoken aloud, but no one has ever found the source. And that's the one thing that has never been explained, why the wind keeps talking, and why it only talks to those who listen closely. Some say the whispers come from the children who vanished in the 1940s, their laughter still echoing through the hollows of these old stone walls. Others say it's the ghosts of the villagers who refused to leave when the army came. Local elders tell of a boy who wandered into the woods and never came back. His mother still waits for him at the edge of the village, her face worn with time and grief. Some say the walls themselves are alive, remembering every secret, every sorrow, every silence that lingers between the stones. They don't just hear the whispers, they carry them. And so, the whispers remain, not just a sound, but a memory, a story passed down, not in words, but in the hush of the wind and the silence between the stones. You know, even now, the villagers say they can still hear the whispers, just before the wind changes. It's like the house remembers what it lost. The search for the missing boy never stopped, but the woods swallowed every clue. Some say the forest knows more than we ever will. No one ever found the boy, but the house never stopped watching. And sometimes, it seems like it's waiting for him to return. So here's the thing, what if the house never really lost him? What if it's just holding on, for the same reason we do? The whispering walls of Tinyham aren't just haunted. They're haunted by a question we've never stopped asking. You can almost hear the wind carrying the echoes of those who once called this place home. What do you think they're trying to tell us, dear listener? There's a kind of quiet that settles in places like Tinyham, a hush that seems to listen as much as it is heard. Sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that don't have endings, just lingering questions and the weight of what we've lost. And now, as the sun begins to set, it's time to turn the page, and perhaps the next story will whisper back. You've heard of places that just hum with the past. Well, this one doesn't just hum, it laughs. A laugh that echoes through the empty halls of the Black Museum, where the air feels thick with something you can't quite name. The Black Museum was once a grand entertainment hall, where the wealthy came to be entertained by a Barker who promised wonders, magic, mystery, and a touch of the supernatural. But something changed the night the Barker vanished, and the laughs never stopped. The night he disappeared, the museum was packed. The laughter grew louder, more manic, as if the Barker had somehow turned the crowd into an extension of his own voice. Then silence, and a laugh that didn't belong to anyone. No one knows what happened to him. Some say he was taken by the museum itself, that the building has a will of its own. Others say he's still there, trapped in the sound of his own laughter, forever trying to make the living believe in what he once sold them. And now, the museum is closed, but the laughter still comes. Some say you can hear it on certain nights, when the wind howls through the empty halls and the air feels like it's holding its breath. You remember the old Black Museum? It was the kind of place where the velvet ropes weren't for the rich, but for the curious. A few blocks from the train station, it sat like a forgotten jewel in the heart of the city, with its iron gates and peeling paint, just begging to be explored. It was run by a man named Elias Black, a collector of the unusual, who believed that history was best preserved in the hands of those who truly understood it. He wasn't a man for sentimentality. His collection included everything from old medical instruments to the remains of people who had died under mysterious circumstances. But the real story began with a man named Julian Barker. A Barker, he was someone who sold tickets to the public, but he had a talent for more than just selling. He was a storyteller, a performer, a man who knew how to make people laugh, even in the darkest of places. Julian was the kind of man who could make you laugh at your own fear. He had a way of turning the most sinister of tales into something entertaining, something you could almost believe. But some stories, even he couldn't tell. And that's where it all started. A partnership built on curiosity, a shared love of mystery, and a little bit of mischief. Together, they created a place where the past wasn't just remembered, it was performed, and sometimes, it performed back. You remember the way the lights flickered just before the laughter started, like the house itself was trying to warn us. It was a quiet flicker, not the kind that breaks a bulb, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. Then came the first laugh, a low, dry chuckle that didn't belong to anyone in the room. It echoed through the walls like it had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to be heard. The laughter grew louder, more frequent, until it felt like the whole house was laughing with us. But there was no one else here, just the silence and the sound of something unseen. It was then that the first real chill came, not from the air, but from the way the laughter seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, like it had a mind of its own. And just like that, the laughter stopped. Silence fell, heavy and thick, as if the house had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. You remember the way the lights flickered in the museum, like a dying heartbeat. That's when the laughter started, low and wet, echoing through the halls like a secret being whispered. The Barker Mr. V, they called him, was never seen again after that night. They say he vanished into the crowd, but no one saw him leave. Just the laughter, and the silence that followed. They found his coat in the parking lot, but no body. Just the scent of burnt sugar and the faint sound of a laugh, like a ghost trapped in the air, waiting for someone to listen. Now, when the museum closes, the laughter comes again. A warning, a memory, a whisper that the Barker never left, just waiting for the next visitor to hear him, and to forget. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have seen the Barker in the museum's hallways. One woman said he was standing there, grinning like he knew she was watching him. Another visitor swore she heard him laughing right behind her, but when she turned, there was no one there, just a cold breeze and the echo of a deep, cackling voice. The most chilling account came from a retired curator. He said the Barker would appear in the late hours, standing in the doorway of the antique clock room, just watching. He said the Barker would disappear the moment he tried to approach, always leaving behind a faint smell of old tobacco and a lingering sense of being watched. Even the security cameras caught something, just a flicker of movement, a silhouette that never stayed still, and a laugh that never faded. We followed the Barker's trail to a dusty warehouse on the edge of town, where the air smelled like old paper and forgotten secrets. The walls were lined with rusted lockers, like a museum of misfit toys, and the floor creaked underfoot like a living thing. The first thing we found was a ledger, yellowed with age, filled with names and dates that didn't match any records. It was as if the Barker had been keeping track of people who never existed, or maybe people who had been erased from history. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the Barker wasn't just a performer, he was a collector of stories, and some of them were too painful to tell. He left behind traces of lives that had been cut short, and the weight of them pressed on our shoulders. One final clue led us to a sealed-off room where the walls were covered in a strange, repeating pattern faces, all looking in the same direction, like they were watching us. It was as if the Barker had built a mirror to the past, and we were the last to see it. You ever notice how some things just don't make sense? Like the one detail about the Barker that nobody can seem to agree on. Some say he wore a top hat, others insist he had no head at all. It's like the more you dig, the more the story just folds in on itself. And yet, the most puzzling part? No one seems to remember what he looked like in the end. It's like the last laugh was never meant to be heard at all. Maybe the Barker was the man at all. Maybe he was just a sound, a memory, a whisper in the dark that never quite goes away. So, what do you think? Was he real, or was he just the last laugh of a place that never forgot? You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the townsfolk really think? Some say the Barker's laugh is just the wind, others whisper that it's the ghost of a man who never found peace. There's a local legend that every Halloween, the Barker appears in the museum's old theater, performing for the ghosts who still haunt the place. Some say the Barker was a real person, a Barker at the museum who died in a mysterious accident, and now his laughter haunts the place where he once called home. Others believe the Barker is just a figment of the imagination, a symbol of the fear that lingers in every haunted place where the past refuses to be forgotten. But no matter the theory, one thing remains true: when the wind howls through those windows, you can always hear the last laugh of the phantom Barker. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't what you see, but what you feel in the silence between the laughs. That's what makes this place so strange. It's not the Barker who haunts, but the absence of him. The last known visitor to the museum claimed the Barker vanished mid-performance, leaving only a pocket watch and a faint scent of burnt sugar on the stage. But no one ever found the body or the watch. The museum's caretaker insists the Barker's laughter is still heard late at night, but when they go to investigate, it's always too late. The doors are locked from the inside, and no one is there. Some say the Barker is just a trick of the light, a ghost of a bygone era, but others say he's still there, waiting for the next person to fall for his laugh and never leave. So the question remains, was he ever real, or is he just a story we keep telling ourselves? And if he is real, where is he now, and why won't he stop laughing? You ever notice how the air feels different when you're near a place that's been touched by something not quite right? It's like the silence holds its breath, waiting for the next ghost to whisper. Sometimes, the most chilling stories are the ones that never quite finish, like a joke told in a room that's too quiet, or a laugh that lingers just a second too long. So, if you're ever wandering through a place that feels just a little too warm, or a little too still, remember this: some doors are meant to stay closed, and some laughs are meant to haunt. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I hear the Barker laughing again. You've heard of the Caddo, haven't you? A people who once flourished here, in the heart of what's now Louisiana and Texas. But their story ends in silence, like the wind that whispers through the trees. This place, these woods, still feels like it holds their breath. You can almost hear the rustling of unseen feet, the hush of a story waiting to be told. It's not just the silence that's strange, it's the way it lingers. The Caddo vanished in the 18th century, swallowed by the tides of history. Some say they were killed, others say they fled, but no one knows for sure. And that's what makes this place so unsettling: no answers, just echoes. You've heard of haunted places, but this is a place that remembers. A place that guards its secrets like a mother guards her child. And sometimes, the child never comes home. You know, the Caddo weren't just a people, they were a civilization, a culture, a way of life. They lived in harmony with the land, and the land was their home. And yet, one day, that home was taken from them. The Caddo were skilled farmers, builders, and traders. They built earthwork mounds, raised maize, and crafted beautiful pottery. They were not just surviving, they were thriving, living in balance with the world around them. The first contact was peaceful, but it was not long before the Caddo found themselves caught in a web of violence, disease, and deception. They were promised peace, but they were given bullets and chains instead. The Caddo were not just victims of history, they were part of a larger story of resistance, survival, and resilience. Their legacy lives on, even as their people were forced to scatter and fade into the shadows. You remember how the Caddo people once danced in the moonlight, their laughter echoing through the forests? Now, the silence is so heavy, it feels like the earth itself is holding its breath. The first signs were subtle crops failing without reason, animals acting strangely, and a kind of unease settling over the village like a heavy quilt. The elders tried to calm the people, telling stories of the Caddo's strength and their connection to the land. But even they couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. And then, one by one, the people began to disappear without a sound, without a trace, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. You remember the night the moon turned blood red, and the Caddo people vanished like smoke in the wind. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole, leaving only silence where there had been life. The elders say that on that night, the Caddo danced in the moonlight, their voices rising in song, only to be snatched away by something that did not belong to this world. No one knows what happened, but they all remember the sound of silence. Some say the Caddo were taken by the spirits of the land, their souls bound to the earth, their bodies left behind as offerings. Others whisper that they were hunted by something that walks the line between man and beast. No bones were ever found, no bodies, just a village that was once full of life, now standing in the dark like a forgotten dream. And the wind still carries their voices on the night of the blood moon. I've spoken with several elderly Caddo descendants who say they've heard the whispers of the ancestors in the stillness of the night, like the wind through the trees. They say it's not a voice, but a presence. One man told me he once saw a figure in the forest, cloaked in gray, moving like the mist. It didn't look at him, just passed through the trees as if it belonged there. Another woman claimed she saw a child's doll at the edge of a cornfield, left there by the wind. She said the doll was made of clay, not wood, and had eyes that seemed to follow her. These stories don't make sense, but they carry weight. They're not just tales, they're echoes of a people who vanished without a trace, and the land remembers. If you've ever felt something watching you in the dark, you might be hearing the Caddo. They're not gone, they're just waiting for someone to listen. The team started with the old records, you know, the dusty files and the faded maps. They thought maybe the Caddo had just moved on, but something felt off. A quiet kind of rawness, like the pages were whispering. Then they found the sketches, old, hand-drawn maps of the Caddo lands with strange symbols and markings that didn't match any known language. Some of them had been crossed out, like someone had tried to erase them. One of the researchers said it looked like a warning, like the Caddo had left behind a message, not just a map. They couldn't say for sure, but the feeling stayed with them, like they were being watched. They found old journals too, written in a cursive that seemed to shift when you looked at it too long. The words were strange, almost like they were trying to warn someone about something that was still happening. And then, the most unsettling thing of all, the team found a name that hadn't been in the records for decades. A name that made them stop and think and wonder if the Caddo were still out there, waiting. You know, the thing that has always bugged me is this one little detail: no one ever explains what happened to the Caddo Nation's sacred artifacts. Did they vanish with the people, or were they hidden away in some way we've never found? It's like they were never meant to be found again, but no one can say for sure why. Some said they were taken by the Spanish, others that the Caddo hid them before they were forced to leave their homeland. It's strange, isn't it? We talk about the Caddo as a people who disappeared, but their stories are still out there waiting, like ghosts to be found. And here's the thing: no one's ever found the answer. Not the archaeologists, not the historians, not even the people who still live near where they once did. So, what do you think? Did the Caddo leave their stories behind, or did they take them with them into the night? Maybe that's the real mystery. You've heard the stories about the Caddo, but have you ever wondered what they might think of us now? They say the land remembers, and the wind carries their voices still. Some say the Caddo vanished because they were forced to. Others believe they were taken by the earth itself. And then there are those who say the spirits are still here, waiting for the right time to return. The stories keep changing, but one thing remains the same: the Caddo are not forgotten. They are part of the land, the wind, the stories we tell around the fire. So, when you walk through these woods, listen closely. You might just hear them: whispers in the wind, echoes in the trees, a story that's been waiting to be told. Even now, the Caddo people remain missing from the records, like a whisper lost in the wind. We've traced their footprints through history, but the trail just ends. What happened to them, and where did they go? Some say they vanished into the forests, others claim they were swallowed by the earth itself. The stories don't agree, but the silence does. Silence is the only witness left. No one knows if these markings are prayers, warnings, or something else entirely. They sit there, forgotten, like a message from the past that no one is ready to read. We may never find the truth, but we can keep the memory alive. The Caddo people are still with us, in the land, in the stories, and in the quiet places where the wind speaks their name. You ever notice how the wind sometimes whispers in a language only the earth understands? It's like it's trying to tell us something we've forgotten. Maybe the Caddo didn't vanish, they just learned to speak a language we can't hear anymore. A language of roots and rivers, of stone and sky. And maybe, just maybe, they're still listening, waiting for someone to ask the right question, to lean in close enough to hear the answer. So, I'll leave you with this: the past isn't gone, it's just waiting for the right moment to speak. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a story about a haunted house in the Ozarks that's been waiting a long time to be heard. You've heard of the Caddo Nation, haven't you? A people who once danced in the misty forests of East Texas, their lives woven with the rhythm of the earth and the whispers of the wind. But today, we're not here to celebrate their history today. We're here to listen to the silence that lingers where their bones once lay. This land isn't just forgotten, it's remembered. Not in the way you remember a birthday or a holiday, but in the way the earth remembers something that was never meant to be buried. Stories say that if you walk a path at dusk, you might hear them voices, not words, just echoes, just presence. But what happens when a people's sacred places are disturbed? What happens when their stories are told in whispers, in silence, in the way the wind moves through the trees? You might not hear them, but you'll feel them. The land remembers. The earth remembers. And sometimes the ghosts remember too. So, we come to this place now not to disturb, not to exploit, but to listen. To hear the echoes of a people who once thrived here, and to wonder, what do they want us to remember? What do they want us to feel? And what do they want us to leave behind? You've heard the stories of the haunted, but have you ever wondered where the real ghosts come from? The Caddo Nation's history is older than the first settlers, older even than the Spanish, and it's buried beneath our feet. The Caddo people were skilled farmers and builders, living in harmony with the land. They built mounds, planted corn, and wove their lives into the soil like roots in the earth. But when the Europeans came, the Caddo were not just seen, they were targeted. Disease, war, and forced removal left their villages in ruins, and their graves were forgotten. Today, we walk where the Caddo once walked, and we listen for the echoes of their voices in the wind, in the silence between the trees, and in the stories we've kept alive. You know how sometimes the air just feels different, like the world holds its breath? That's what it was like that morning, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. The radio crackled with static, and the operator said, "We've got something strange on the radar, but it's not showing up on any maps." It was like the land had gone invisible, or maybe it had never been there at all. There was a rumor that the Caddo had once buried their dead in a sacred place, and now that place was waking up. Some said it was a warning, others a sign that something was coming. And then, one night, the wind changed. It wasn't just a breeze, it was a whisper, and it carried something old and heavy, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken names. The air grew colder, and the silence turned into something else, something that didn't belong to this world. And we all knew, in our bones, that something was terribly wrong. You ever wonder what happens when the earth itself begins to whisper secrets? The Caddo Nation's burial grounds were more than just graves, they were sacred, a place where the dead and living shared the same sky. In the 1800s, the United States government began taking land from the Caddo, often without consent. Some say the graves were disturbed, the bones laid bare to the elements, and the spirits left without proper farewell. Local elders say the land still remembers, that if you walk quietly at night, you might hear the voices of the Caddo, carried on the wind like a distant song, but never quite reaching you. And then there's the disappearance of the last Caddo elder. She vanished without a trace, leaving only her journal, filled with stories of the land and the voices that call from beneath the soil. Some say the land took her, not to punish but to protect. That the Caddo were never truly gone, just waiting for someone to listen and to remember. I've heard from a few folks who swear they've seen shadows moving in the cornfields near the old Caddo burial grounds. They say they're not the kind of people to believe in ghosts, but they'll tell you the air there feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. One woman told me she was walking her dog one night and saw a flicker of light near the riverbank. She turned, and there was nothing, just the river reflecting the moon and the feeling of being watched. They all say the same thing: the Caddo are not gone. They're still here, in the land, in the air, in the silence between the trees. And they're waiting. So, what do you think? Are you listening because you're curious, or because you feel something in your bones, like the land is calling you to remember? We followed the trail of whispers through the dense woods, our boots crunching on dry leaves, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, something that had been buried for centuries. The ground was uneven, marked by old footprints and the faint outlines of structures long since collapsed, remnants of a people who once thrived here, now silent and forgotten. We found fragments of pottery, tools, and bones, human and animal, placed with deliberate care, as if the Caddo had once tried to communicate with those who would come after them. But what unsettled us most was not the artifacts, but the silence that followed, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to be remembered. We left with more questions than answers, the weight of history pressing down on us like a stone, and the feeling that we had disturbed something that had been waiting a long time to be heard. You've heard the stories, but there's one detail that has never been explained. The grave markers, they vanished. Not stolen, not moved, just gone. What could take a stone from the earth without a sound? Some say the wind carries them away, but the wind here doesn't blow like anywhere else. It whispers through the trees like a voice trying to say something it can't quite finish. The locals never talk about it. They say the Caddo people didn't just vanish, they were taken. But by whom? And why would the graves be left untouched, as if waiting for something to come back for them? You think you know the end of a story, but sometimes the real mystery is what's left unsaid. The grave markers are gone, but the silence is still there, waiting for you to listen. You've heard the stories, but have you ever stopped to ask why these graves were forgotten? Maybe it's not just the earth that's holding secrets, it's the people who came before us, whispering through time. Some say the Caddo didn't just vanish, they were buried alive by their own people, or by the ones who took their land. Others say they were never meant to be found, and the land itself is still trying to protect them. Some say the Caddo left behind a curse, a warning that their graves would one day be disturbed, and that those who seek them will be met with silence, or worse, with echoes that never fade. Even today, some locals claim to hear the wind carrying voices, soft, distant, and full of grief. They say it's the Caddo, trying to speak through the silence, trying to be remembered. So, what do you think? Are these just stories, or are they a way for the past to reach out, to be heard, to be remembered? The land doesn't forget, and neither do those who walk it with reverence. You know, sometimes the worst mysteries aren't about who did it, but who got left behind. And in the case of the Caddo, it's not just the graves that linger, it's the people who never found their loved ones. The records are sparse, the names are lost, and the stories are fragmented. But what's more haunting is that the Caddo never gave up. They kept searching, even after the world turned its back. They found artifacts, yes, but no bodies. Just the echoes of a people who refused to be forgotten. And in the quiet of the night, sometimes you can hear them calling for more. So here's the thing, dear listener, some graves are never found, and some stories are never told. But as long as we remember, the Caddo will never be truly gone. You've heard the whispers of the Caddo, felt the weight of their silent sorrow. But what if the grave isn't just a place, it's a memory, a promise, a warning? Sometimes the most haunting stories aren't told in words, but in the way the wind moves through the trees, or the way the earth remembers those who were never laid to rest. The past doesn't stay buried. It finds its way back to those who still walk this land and waits for the right moment to speak. So as we turn the page, remember this, the Caddo's echoes aren't just in the silence. They're in the wind, the soil, and the stories we choose to carry. You've heard of the Tower of London, but have you ever wondered what it's like to walk its ancient stones? The air hums with secrets, and the cobbled paths whisper of a past that refuses to stay buried. This is a place where history and haunting collide. Centuries of imprisonment, executions, and royal drama have left their mark both on the stones and on the souls that linger. There's a strange kind of peace here, but it's not quite peace. It's more like a quiet waiting, as if the very air holds its breath for something to happen. The tower isn't just haunted by the dead, it's haunted by the weight of the past. Every step you take echoes with the footsteps of those who came before, and sometimes you can almost hear them. But why is this place so eerie? What stories still linger in these halls? And who exactly is waiting for you to listen? You know, the Tower of London didn't start as a prison or a palace. It began as a fortress, a symbol of royal power, built by William the Conqueror in 1078. He wanted to make sure his new kingdom wouldn't rise up against him again. The first stone was laid by William himself, and it was meant to guard the Thames in the heart of England. But even back then, there were whispers of curses, of blood, of a place that would never be truly safe. Over the centuries, the tower became a prison for the powerful, a treasury, a royal residence, and a place of execution. But it was also the site of many secret dealings between kings, queens, and the people who dared to challenge them. One of the earliest infamous prisoners was the young Edward, the Earl of Warwick, who was executed in 1469. His body was said to be dragged through the streets, and his blood spilled on the cobblestones. That's where the legend of the Bloody Tower began. The tower's history is a tapestry of power, betrayal, and tragedy. Every stone holds a memory, every wall whispers a secret, and the ghosts, well, they've been waiting a long time to be heard. You remember the first time you noticed the steps were different. The cobbles were slick, not from rain, but something older, something darker, like time had left a stain. You glanced down, and for a moment, you swore you saw a faint, red smear across the stone like someone had wiped their hand on it, or maybe something else had left its mark. You told yourself it was just age, just the weight of centuries pressing down on the stone. But deep down, you knew that the color was too fresh, the stain too deliberate. You looked around, half expecting to see a figure at the top of the stairs, waiting, watching, or maybe just breathing. But the silence was too thick, too heavy for comfort. That was the first time you felt it, the chill that starts at your spine and works its way down, like the steps themselves were whispering a warning you couldn't quite hear. You've heard the whispers of the tower's ghosts, but now you're standing where the real horror began. A young woman, barely 16, vanished one October night in 1548, her fate sealed by a crown and a dagger. Her name was Anne Boleyn, and her story is etched into the very stones of this place. She was accused of treason, of conspiring against the king, and of breaking the sacred vows of marriage. She was led to the scaffold, her head taken, her body buried in the tower's foundations. But the tower doesn't forget. It remembers every betrayal, every broken heart, every whispered prayer. Some say her spirit still walks these halls, a ghost in white, seeking the truth she was denied. Others say her voice echoes in the wind, a warning to those who dare to break the rules. And so the tower stands, a monument to power and pain, a place where history and horror are one. You walked these steps, you've heard the whispers, but will you ever hear her voice again? Some say the tower's stones whisper in the dead of night, and the ones who have heard them never speak of it again. Have you ever felt the weight of a place, the way it holds its secrets close? A woman in the 1700s claimed she saw a ghostly figure in the White Tower, dressed in a red gown, her face obscured by a veil of smoke. She said it was the ghost of a royal bride, lost to time. One guard swore he heard the sound of footsteps on the cobbled stairs, even though the tower was empty. He said the sound was so loud, it made his bones vibrate. A few years back, a historian working late at night heard a voice calling from the basement. It said, "Come closer, I have something to show you." He never returned to the tower again. The stories never end, and the tower doesn't seem to care who listens. But if you're ever passing through, just remember to look up and keep your feet on solid ground. We followed the trail of whispers, past the rusted chains and the broken stones, deep into the heart of the tower. The air smelled of damp stone and something older, something that clung to the walls like a secret. The records were sparse, but they hinted at a pattern, a string of disappearances, not of soldiers or prisoners, but of those who had come seeking peace. The king's own physician was said to have vanished in the night, his door left ajar, his boots still by the hearth. The investigators found a hidden chamber beneath the chapel, sealed for centuries, its walls lined with rusted iron and the faint scent of something like blood. It was as if the room had been waiting for someone to remember it. They found no bodies, no signs of struggle, just a single journal, its pages filled with desperate confessions and pleas. The writer had been searching for something, or someone, and the tower had given them nothing but silence. And then, in the quietest moment, one of the investigators swore he heard a voice, soft, pleading, echoing through the stones. A whisper that said, "You're not the first to come looking." You know, the thing that haunts me most isn't the ghosts or the blood, it's the one detail that has never been explained. No one knows exactly what happened in that cell, not even the historians. It's like the tower itself is guarding a secret it won't let out. There's a legend that the prisoner was a woman, but no one can say for sure. Some say she was a noble, others claim she was a commoner. The only thing they all agree on is that she was locked in that cell, and that's all. You ever wonder what it feels like to be forgotten by history? To be locked away, not just in chains, but in silence? That's what it's like to be the one detail that has never been explained. Maybe that's why the tower still whispers. Maybe it's trying to tell us something. Or maybe it's just trying to remember. Either way, that one detail, it's still out there, waiting for someone to ask the right question. You've heard the tales of the crown jewels and the White Tower, but what about the whispers in the stone? Some say the blood of the princes in the tower still lingers in the cracks, and the walls remember every cry. There's a local legend about a ghostly figure in a red cloak who walks the corridors at night. Some say it's the ghost of Anne Boleyn, others claim it's a soldier from the 1600s who never left the tower. Theories abound. Some believe the tower is a prison for the souls of those who died in its walls. Others think it's a place where time bends and the dead still walk among the living. What do you think? Do you believe the tower holds more than just history, or is it just the echoes of a place that has seen too much? As we move forward, you'll hear the stories that refuse to be silent, stories that have been passed down through generations, and that still echo in the silence of the tower. There's still no official answer to what happened to those poor souls who vanished in the shadow of the White Tower. You know, the ones who were never found, never explained. Some say it's the tower itself, whispering to those who stepped too close. Others say it's the ghosts of the prisoners who never left. And yet, the tower still stands. It's not a place of ghosts, but of history, of pain, of power, of people who were forgotten. So, I wonder, what will we discover next? What new secrets will the tower reveal? Or what will it keep from us? You've walked the bloodied steps of the tower, and now the silence is thick with the weight of centuries. What do you think lingers in the stones beneath your feet? The tower has whispered its secrets to many, but never to all. Do you believe some stories are meant to stay buried, like the bones of those who fell? As the wind carries the scent of damp stone and old iron, do you hear the echo of a voice, or is it just the wind trying to tell its own story? And when the next tale begins, will you be ready to listen, or will you let the silence of the tower remind you that some doors are never meant to be opened? You've heard of the Tower of London, but have you ever wondered what it whispered in the dark? A place where history and horror intertwine, where the past clings to the stones like ivy. For centuries, it was a prison, a treasury, a crown jewel, yet it was also the site of executions, betrayals, and disappearances. The air here feels heavier, as if the weight of time has settled into the very mortar. But the real horror isn't just in what happened here, it's in what still lingers. The tower is a place where the dead don't stay buried, and the living don't always leave quietly. So, as we step into this tale, I want you to imagine yourself in the shadow of the White Tower, feeling the chill of history and the weight of secrets that refuse to rest. What do you hear in the silence? A whisper? A sigh? Or just the wind reminding you that this place has seen more than you can imagine? You know, the Tower of London didn't start as a prison, but as a palace. Imagine, if you will, a golden age of kings and queens where the walls held more than just secrets, they held the hearts of a nation. In 1066, William the Conqueror built this place as a symbol of his power. It was more of a fortress than a palace, but still, it stood proud, watching over the city like a silent sentinel. Over the centuries, the tower became a place of both grandeur and horror. It was a place where kings were crowned, queens were imprisoned, and secrets were buried deeper than the earth. And let's not forget, it was also where the crown jewels were kept. Those gleaming treasures, hidden in a vault beneath the very stones where the innocent and the powerful once walked. So, you see, the Tower of London is more than just a building. It's a place where history and legend intertwine, and where the past still whispers its secrets to those who dare to listen. You remember how the air felt that morning, thick and heavy, like the world was holding its breath. The tower stood silent, but something in the stones seemed to whisper. Did you notice the way the fog clung to the walls like a morning veil? The guards had already left, but the gates remained slightly ajar, as if inviting the wind in. You could feel that something was waiting just beyond the threshold, patient and ancient. What do you think it was waiting for? As you walked through the courtyard, you noticed the grass had been trampled in strange patterns, like someone had been pacing, or maybe dancing. It was unnatural, deliberate. Did you feel the ground vibrate beneath your feet? Then came the smell, something old, damp, and metallic, like blood on stone. It clung to your clothes, your skin, and somehow it felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. What did you think it was, really? You turned back, but the path behind you seemed to stretch longer than it should. The air grew colder, and for a moment, you thought you saw a shadow move in the corner of your eye, just for an instant, and then it was gone. Did you see it, or was it just your imagination? You see it now, the White Tower, its stone walls worn by time, its windows dark as if the eyes of the dead are watching. But the air feels heavier here, like the weight of 1,000 unspoken secrets. In 1476, a young woman named Eleanor Cobham was imprisoned here, accused of witchcraft. The tower wasn't just a prison, it was a place of judgment, where truth and terror walked hand in hand. Her husband, the Duke of Buckingham, was executed for treason just days after she was imprisoned. Some say she was innocent, others say she knew too much. But no one ever found her body, just the echo of her scream in the stones. To this day, some claim to hear her voice in the wind, a whisper that calls out from the walls. It's not just a ghost, it's a warning, a plea, a story the tower refuses to let fade. I've spoken to dozens of people who say they've seen the ghost of Anne Boleyn, and they all describe her the same way, wearing a blue dress, her hair loose, her eyes full of sorrow. They say she walks the halls of the tower, looking for someone to speak to. One woman told me she saw Anne in the gardens, standing by the water, her hands trembling as if she were trying to hold something she couldn't reach. she said, and looked like she was waiting for someone who never came. Others say they heard her voice, a soft whisper calling from the cells, asking for help. One man said he heard her say, "I didn't do it," over and over again, like she was trying to convince someone she was innocent. There's a common thread here: no one sees her with a happy face. She's always in pain, always searching, always alone, and that's what makes her the most haunting of all. We followed the trail of whispers through the archives, where dust motes danced in the beams of ancient lamps. The investigator's notes were filled with red ink and frantic crossings out, like he was trying to outrun the past itself. The first clue was a faded map, inked in a hand that had long since turned to dust. It marked a spot in the shadow of the White Tower, where the air had once been thick with the cries of a child. That night, we stood beneath the shadow of the White Tower, where the air smelled of damp stone and the Thames whispered secrets in the dark. The silence was heavy, like the weight of centuries pressing down on us. The investigator claimed to hear a child's voice, faint but clear, echoing through the stone. He said it wasn't just sound, it was a presence, a child's presence, lingering in the air like a ghost in the fog. As we stood there, the wind picked up, and the child's voice grew louder, not in anger, but in sorrow, a sound that made the investigator turn pale and step back, as if the past had reached out to claim him. The investigation didn't end with a name or a face. It left us with something heavier: questions that no map or book could answer, and a sense that the tower still holds more than just its history. You've heard the stories of the White Knight, the Bloody Tower, the crown jewels, but there's one thing that has never been explained. Why did the king's favorite son vanish without a trace? And why does his ghost still haunt the stone corridors? The boy was just 12 when he disappeared. Some say he was taken by the king's enemies, others say he was locked away for his own good, but no one ever found his body, and no one ever explained what happened. Some say his ghost still walks the halls, whispering in the dark, seeking answers no one is willing to ask. Others say he's not a ghost at all, but a prisoner whose fate was never decided. What do you think? Was he a victim of the crown, or did he choose to vanish? And why, after all these centuries, does the tower still keep his secret? You've heard the tales of Anne Boleyn and the princes in the tower, but what about the whispers of the tower's own ghostly keepers? Some say the stone walls hum with the voices of those who once ruled and died in silence. A local legend claims the tower is haunted by the ghost of a young girl who never got to grow up. Her name is lost to time, but her sorrow lingers in the wind that howls through the battlements. Some believe the tower holds the souls of those who were never meant to be buried: princes, queens, and servants alike, trapped in the very stones that built their tombs. Theories abound, but one thing remains certain: the tower is not just a place, it's a living memory, and its ghosts are still waiting to be heard. You know, some mysteries don't just fade with time, they cling to the stones, waiting for someone to listen. The tower's secrets are still whispering, even now. They say the crown jewels still hum with the energy of those who once guarded them. Maybe the ghosts are just trying to tell us something we've forgotten. And what if the tower is still watching? What if it's not just the ghosts that linger, but the weight of history, the pain of the past, and the questions that never got answered? So I ask you, dear listener, what will you do with the mystery? Will you walk away, or will you stay just a little longer and listen? You walked with me through the shadowed corridors of history, through the whispers of the past that still cling to these stones. But sometimes, the deepest fears are the ones that stay with you long after the story is done. I wonder, as I always do, what it is that lingers in places like this, what memories, what sorrow, what secrets still refuse to let go of the earth. And perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest ghosts are not the ones we see but the ones we feel, in the silence between the stories, in the spaces where the light won't reach. But don't worry, there's more where this came from. The next tale is waiting, and I've got just the right kind of chill for it. You ever heard of a place where the air hums with sorrow, and the silence speaks louder than any scream? This is the Whitechapel, a crumbling relic in the heart of a forgotten town, where the ghosts of lost children still sing in the dark. It's not the architecture that makes people whisper, but the way the wind seems to carry a melody through the halls, a lullaby, or a lament, depending on who you ask. Some say it's the children who once prayed there, now trapped in the echoes of their own prayers. They say the chapel is haunted by the children who were never found, their voices rising in a choir that only the lost can hear. It's not the fear that lingers, it's the feeling that you're being watched, and the music is getting closer. You might come here for the history, or the mystery, or the silence, but once you hear the choir, you'll never leave the same. And you'll wonder, was that a child, or just the wind, singing the song of the lost? You see that old stone wall? That's where it all began. A small chapel built in the early 1800s, tucked away in a quiet village where the church bells used to ring like a lullaby. The chapel was a place of peace, but it also held secrets. A priest named Father Elias, a man of quiet conviction, brought a small group of women to pray and find solace in their grief. The women came with stories of loss, wars, accidents, and the sudden vanishing of loved ones. They found comfort in the chapel, but something strange began to happen in the silence. Some said they heard whispers in the air, like a choir of voices just out of reach. Others swore they saw shadows moving in the corners, though no one was there. The silence became a presence, a reminder of the pain they carried. Some left, others stayed, but the chapel never let go of its past or its people. You know how sometimes the air just feels different, like the world has paused just long enough to let you catch your breath. That's what it was like the first night at the Whitechapel. The silence was so thick, you could have cut it with a knife. The caretaker, a retired priest named Father O'Connor, said it was just the wind. But the wind didn't make that sound. It was more like a choir, low and mournful, echoing through the hollowed-out pews. The next morning, the parishioners arrived, whispering about dreams of children's laughter and a voice calling them by name. No one could explain why the organ had played itself in the night, or why the candles had burned down to stubs without a flame. Father O'Connor tried to dismiss it as the work of a grieving family, but the rumors grew. Some said the chapel had been built on a battlefield. Others claimed the voices were the souls of those who died in the war, still waiting for peace. And then, the first real sign, a boy's shoe, left in the pews, perfectly placed, as if someone had sat there and then vanished without a trace. No one knew who he was. No one knew how he got there. You ever wonder what happens when a church goes silent? Imagine the hush of a Sunday morning, the air thick with the scent of old incense, and then nothing. Just the echo of footsteps in an empty nave, like someone left the keys in the pews. The last Mass was held on the night of April 13, 1962. The rector vanished, leaving behind a locked door and a hymn book stained with what looks like dried blood, though no one will say for sure what it is. The parishioners say the organ still plays when no one's near. They hear it at night, a soft, mournful melody, like the choir is trying to say something they can't understand. And then there's the little girl. She was the last to leave, her mother says. She was only 6, but she swore she saw the rector standing at the altar, holding a candle and smiling at her like he knew something she didn't. The police closed the case, said it was a tragic accident, but the church still stands, and every Sunday, the organ plays just a little louder, like it's waiting for someone to finally listen. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching.